We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos and Chelek of Gimel. This is the first Sicha for the Chag Shavuos for the Yom Tov Shavuos. In this Sicha, the Rebbe goes into a very lengthy explanation and question: why don't we fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Torah today, as quoting from the Rambam and the Halacha, that one is obligated to write a Torah? And the Rebbe will also have the whole discussion how this mitzvah applies today. The definition of the mitzvah, is the mitzvah the actual writing, or the mitzvah is to have something to learn from? And the Rebbe will explain that once we have Torah Shabbal Peh, that became the Lamda. The definitions are mainly for the Torah. When the writing was the Torah, then it requires the certain laws that a Torah needs. It needs sirtut, it needs to be done in the proper way. But as it developed into the Torah Shabbal Peh, in essence, we don't need to have that actual kisvu, that actual writing. And the Rebbe will explain, as we'll see in the Sikha inside. But let's look and go step by step. Aleph. The Rambam Paskin, the Rambam rules, mitzvahs asay al kol ish v'ish v'Yisrael. It's a positive mitzvah for every man and man, every person of Israel, of the lichtov sefer Torah la'atzmai, to write a sefer Torah for himself. As the pasuk says, Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Va'atem kisvu lachem es hashira," and now write for yourself this song. So we're not only talking about the actual song Hazinu in the parsha over there, but we're actually talking about the whole Torah. The Rambam explains, Koloimar, that is to say, kisvu lachem Torah sheyesh bo shira zu. Write for yourself a Torah that contains in it this shira. Lefi shein koisvin as haTorah parshias. Because you can't write the Torah, you can't write the Torah sections. The Torah has to be whole. So when the Torah says, write this shira, it's as if the Torah is saying, write the whole Torah. Because there is no writing of portions. And the Rambam continues, even though his parents left for him a Sefer Torah, so he already owns a Sefer Torah. Still, the Rambam says, mitzvah lichtav mishaloi, it is a mitzvah you should write from your own. Now, you should write the Sefer Torah. Now, there's two possibilities. You can actually literally do it by yourself, that if you write it in your hand, you can actually write a Sefer Torah, then it has such a great merit as if you received the Torah from Har Sinai, that you have written the Torah by yourself. But if you don't know how to write, so you make others a shaliach for you. Others write for you. Then the Rambam says another way, instead of writing the entire Torah, fixing a Torah, which means to checking it over and making sure that it's a kosher. So by making it kosher, that's as if you wrote the whole Sefer Torah. V'chol hamagia Sefer Torah. Anybody who looks over and makes sure that Sefer Torah is kosher, even if he looks over one letter, if you make it kosher, then it's as if you wrote the whole Sefer Torah. So it says clearly you have to write a Sefer Torah. How come we don't see people writing Sefer Torah? So the question arises: since writing a Torah is a positive mitzvah for each person and person, how come we don't find? Why don't we see as men soll sich bestadel sein mit keinem sein the mitzvah for schreiben Sefer Torah biyodei? Why don't we see people putting in effort to fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah with his hand? which is kiyuma mitzvah b'shlemusa. That would be the fulfillment of the mitzvah in the most perfect way. Kilu kibla misina, as the Rambam says, to just do it by yourself. Kilu kibla mahar Sinai, as if you received it mahar Sinai. You write, you actually did the writing. Well, practically speaking, if a person doesn't know how to write as well as a sofer, so that case, we don't have, you can make a shaliach. When do we say that it's a mitzvah to do it by yourself if you can do it as good as the shaliach? But if the shaliach does it better than you, then it's not mitzvah boy. The idea to do the mitzvah by yourself is because that shows a respect for the mitzvah. You don't just give it to someone else. But if the other one can do it better than you can, then there's no disrespect. That's okay. So we would understand why giving it to a sofer is the preferred way, even though it's better to write it yourself if you can. Even though there's room to say, there's the idea that we can say, as was schreibt Chelek for him, that if there exists a scribe, an expert, who writes better than him, so then one needs to forego the reward and the advantage for ki'ilu kiblo mahar Sinai, as if you got it from Mount Sinai, which you get when you write it on your own. So you should forego that. Nor medar thinking them safer, but he needs to hire the scribe of schreiben for him to write for him. And the reason is kidei zol zayin sefer Torah noah. It should be a beautiful sefer Torah. Yeshirim should be written durch a labler uman, through a craftsman scribe, a scribe who's a craftsman. Katzivui has the command zekelivan veyu. This is my God, and I'll beautify him. So to make a mitzvah, you have to do it beautifully. Snai lefon of the mitzvahs. Beautify before Hashem with the mitzvahs. So therefore, you need to forego the advantage of writing it by yourself because the sofer writes it more beautiful. And furthermore, unochmer, leuten bir von Tvuas Shor, according to the explanation of the Tvuas Shor, in the minyan for mitzvah by Yosef B'Shluchai, in the idea that it's a mitzvah to do the mitzvah more than sending an agent. Ados is the far. Why is it more to you do the mitzvah? When you make somebody an agent to do a mitzvah, you don't do it yourself. It appears that you're not ready to trouble yourself. And therefore, it's not respect, honor for the mitzvah to go ahead and do the mitzvahs through somebody else. But mashenkin in afal, but as opposed to in a case, when the reason you're making the agent is kidei zu moisev seinen kovet, that is in order to add in the honor ha-mitzvah of the mitzvah. Zogt men nit mitzvah b'yosem b'shluchas. That we don't say that you rather do the mitzvah yourself than the shliach, because the covet of the mitzvah is actually in the shliach, not in you doing it. Pumt uis benidin the dan. So therefore, it turns out that in our case, was there covet that mitzvah is nail fun of the mitzvah? What is the honor of the mitzvah to make the mitzvahs beautiful? For that alabler that requires a craftsman scribe. Is the toder din for mitzvah b'yisem b'shluchai? So we don't have the halacha that you better do it more than the shliach. So maybe that's why hiring the scribe is the better choice than writing it yourself, even though when you write it yourself, you get a higher advantage, and it's kiblam har Sinai. But the Rebbe says that's still a problem. We don't see that people should even hire scribes to write them the Sefer Torah. For them to the sober need the shaila now. This still does not answer the question of above. Because we don't find as mizol zich mishtadel sein that we should put an effort even to have others write for him. We don't even find an effort for a person to look over even one letter in a Sefer Torah. We don't find that. Und damit machen the kosher Sefer Torah. And by looking over, he'll make the Sefer Torah kosher. If he checks it over in such a way, it's as if he wrote the whole thing because he made it a kosher Sefer Torah. How come we don't find people doing that today when this is actually the mitzvah, a mitzvah say, of writing the Sefer Torah? Ois Beis. Pashtus kemen sagen, as der Minig Yisrael in them is Apidas Rosh, that the tradition that we follow, that we don't go write a Sefer Torah, is because we follow the view of the Rabbeinu Osher of the Rosh against the Rambam. What does he hold? As der Chiyuv from Ksiva Sefer Torah of Kol Echad Ve'echad, that the obligation to write a Sefer Torah for each and every one is given, that only was quoting the Doides Hoyrishonim Shahoyu Koisim Sefer Torah V'Leimdim Bay. In the earlier generation, in which they would write the Sefer Torah, and they would study, they would use the Sefer Torah to study. They studied from these Sefer Torahs that they wrote. But nowadays, the day that we write a Sefer Torah and you place it in the shul, likros boy berabim, to read there publicly, not for the individual study in the Sefer Torah that is written. Therefore, today, mitzvahs esi al kol ishmi Yisrael, asher yodim aseges. It is a positive mitzvah on every Jewish person who can afford it, whose hand can reach, lichtov chumashi Torah u'mishna Gemara, to write the chumoshim of the Torah, u'mishna Gemara, and the Mishnah and the Gemara, u'pirusha, and the commentaries, lahagis bahen hu bonav, so that he can study in them, him and his children and his sons. And the Rosh explains, ki mitzvahs ksivas ha-Torah, because the mitzvah of writing the Torah is to learn it. The pasuk says, "Kisu as ashiras v'lamdo as bnei Yisrael simo b'fiyam." That teacher to the bnei Yisrael that should be placed in their mouth. And today is v'ayidei haGemara v'hapirushim, through the Gemara and its commentaries, Yeda Pirusha Mitzvah v'Hadinim al Buriyam, he will know the interpretation of the mitzvahs and the halachas very clearly. Lochein heim hasvarim she'adam mitzvah likoisvam. So therefore, they are the svarim that a person is commanded to write them. It is the Chumash, the Mishnais, and the Gemara and the commentaries. Bosazoi. So this is the view of the Rosh, not the writing of the Sefer Torah nowadays, but rather the Chumoshim and the other commentaries of the Torah Shabbat Peh that explain that we know what to do in order should be Lamdo B'fiyam, B'nei Yisrael should be B'fiyam. Bosazoi Paskin der Mechaber in Shulchan Aruch, and this is also the way the Mechaber, the Beis Yosef, he rules in the Shulchan Aruch, and they quote, that nowadays the mitzvah is to write the Chumashim of the Torah, the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the commentaries. Further, the Rebbe says, Uladas Kama Poskim, according to the view of many commentators, is Nochmer, it's even furthermore. Also Idna is the mitzvah blois b'chomoshim Mishnah Gemara Chulu unit b'Sefer Torah. That nowadays the mitzvah is only with Chumoshim Mishnah Gemara, the Chumash that we print, the Mishnah the Gemara, and not in the Sefer Torah. So maybe that's the reason, because we follow the halacha the way it's brought down in the Rosh and in the Shulchan Aruch. But the Rebbe said, "Das is aber nit masvik." This is not, however, sufficient. Also, as it relates to these svarim, which is the Chumoshim and Mishnais v'chulu, Is a Lashon HaRosh v'Tur Shulchan Aruch. The language in the Rosh and the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch is B'Lashem HaTzivui B'Kra. They use the language of the command as it is in the pasuk. They say mitzvah lichtov. It's a mitzvah to write. Men gefindnit klal uklal. We don't find at all ad mizol sich mishtadel sein schreiben die svarim, that we should put an effort to write these svarim. Oder dingen einem wolzol ze schreiben for him, or to hire someone to write them for you. Oder l'chol apoches, or at least we don't find even that we should be magia zayin a sefer shekona, to look over, to check over a sefer that he bought, kidei mekayim zayin odim mitzvah, in order to fulfill this mitzvah. So, while this is the fulfillment of the mitzvah according to the Rosh and the others, that this is the only way to fulfill the mitzvah is through Chumash, Mishnayos, and Gemara. But why don't we do the writing of the Chumash, Mishnayos, and Gemara, as is the Lashon in the Shulchan Aruch? Un Hagam, and although as Nochdem this is Nispashit geworden the Fuz Ba'olam, that after the print has been spread in the world, is Minna Grev Yisrael Kikulam to Kaufen Sifrei Tfus. So the custom of most Jewish people, as old, is to buy printed svarim. Is afil mizol on them. So even if we should accept as the Lashon Lichtev in Rosh v'Shulchan Aruch, if we should accept that when it says the language to write in the Rosh Shulchan Aruch is koilel oich der eifum von hatfose, so that would also include printing. Vibald hatfose hat vernommen dem Ortung Siva, because now printing has substituted and taken the place of writing. So that's the way to do it, is to print. We cannot, however, count this buying. If you purchase a ready-made sefer, as hiring a sefer to write for him. Especially that in many cases is that the printing may not even be done through a yid. And nobody's asking about it to even ask if they can be, the shaliach who wrote it. Nochmer. So how come we don't find that at least we should be writing the Chumashim, a Mishnah Gemara, or hiring somebody to print it for us specifically? Many cases the printing is done by an angel. Nochmer, begam ze iker. And furthermore, this is also a main point, that Amor Paskun benegayetz Sefer Torah, that Amor rules with regards to Sefer Torah, as b'shas lokchei kach v'lo higia by davar. If a person just buys it like this, a Torah, and he doesn't look over anything in it, mitzvah min hashuk, is like grabbing a mitzvah from the marketplace. He does not fulfill the obligation by just buying the Sefer Torah. Nit v'das Rashi Nemuki Yosef. That is against, not as the opinion of Rashi Nemuki Yosef, as Oich Demult is a Mekayim the mitzvah, that just by buying it in the street, he still would fulfill the mitzvah. They also agree it wouldn't be the perfect mitzvah to buy it and just without looking it over. So the Rashi Nemuki Yosef, at least they say that you fulfill your mitzvah by just buying it without looking it over. But according to the Ramah, you're not yotzeh by just buying it. Is Hein Wiesman yotzeh mitzvahs ksivus chumashim v'chulu? So how do we fulfill the mitzvah of writing the chumashim? Durch kaufen gedruckte svarim on kein hagoy, by purchasing printed svarim without any checking it. You don't check this one. So how are we fulfilling it? According to the Ramah, that's not fulfilling the mitzvah. That's chaytev ben ashuk and lo yotze b'zeh. So the Rebbe is going to explain that what is the difference between the Rosh and the Rambam. What's the chiluk? So the Rebbe says, Gimel, why? What the pastors nemmen on, simply we accept, as in them, in Bashtei the chiluk, zwischen das Rambam and das Rosh, what is the difference between the Rambam's view, who says that you need to davke write a Sefer Torah, and the opinion of the Rosh, and the Rosh's view that we are fulfilling the mitzvah of Kesiva also through the Svarim, that is also the Psak Halacha b'Shulchan Aruch. Is L'shitas HaRambam as the mitzvah is Kesiva Sefer Torah, that according to the view of the Rambam, that the mitzvah is to write a Sefer Torah, the Riber is das Mechayiv as in them zol zayin the Maisu Pulos Odom. That's why that already also obligates us that there needs to be the act and the act of the person. Since the obligation is a Sefer Torah, then the person needs to go ahead and do the writing, because that's the way we do a Sefer Torah. So if it's only a Sefer Torah needs to be the person's doing, because that's the way it makes a kosher Sefer Torah. You can't have a Sefer Torah printed or anything else. So since, according to the Rambam, you need a Sefer Torah dafka, so this has to have the act of the person, the ksiva from the Sefer Torah. He must write the Torah. And therefore, if he doesn't know how to write, others write it. And Sefer Torah, and anybody who checks over a Sefer Torah, even if it's just one letter, so that's as if he's written the whole thing. And that's why you cannot fulfill the obligation if you purchase already written Sefer Torah, because since the Sefer Torah is the mitzvah, therefore you have to be involved in writing the Sefer Torah. But according to the view of the Rosh, and the ruling in the Shulchan Aruch is mitzvahs, the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah is not the act of writing the Sefer Torah, it's to learn it. And the far is negay, and that's why it's important as mizal hobun this svarim. It's not to write this svarim, but we should own these svarim. To learn in zay, to study them. Aber nicht zu schreiben zay, I feel nicht magie sein. But we don't have to write them, not even to check them over. So that would seemingly answer the issue that we have. Why don't we find that we need to send somebody to write for us the Chumashim or write for us the Mishnayos? Because according to the Rosh, it's not the act, it's the possession of the Sefarim that is accomplished by a printer that you purchase it. But the Rebbe says, Aber von Teuchen in Rosh is Muchach nid vidr chiluk kanal. But in the contents in the Rosh, it's evident that it is not like the above distinction. The Rosh said right like this. This was in the earlier generation. It's a flow to the language and the opinion of the Rambam. He quotes the Rambam and he says this was in the earlier generation. His movement is understood as the Rosh is nit oisen zum achadish sein anayin geder in mitzvahs ksiva sefer Torah. So it's understood that the Rosh is not coming to come up with a new definition in the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, anders with the Rambam, different than the Rambam says. Nor blois zu bechalik sein, the distinction that the Rosh is coming to make here is only bein hazmani, only the difference in time. V'negei vos men zol shraib. The question is only what we should be writing. Also idna is the mitzvah lichte chumshe ha-Torah u'mishna u'gemara, that today the mitzvah is to write the chumshe ha-Torah mishna gemara u'pirushem and their commentaries lahagis bahen hu banav, so he can study him and his son. So the only difference is what you have to write, but not to disagree with the premises and the definitions of the Rambam. That over here, that there's no longer a mitzvah of the writing, it's a mitzvah to possess. That's not the way the flow in the Rashi is. The flow in the Rashi is that it's the same mitzvah as the Rambam wrote to write, but here is just changing. Instead of writing the Torah, we're writing the Gemara. So why don't we write? Why don't we find that? Also, we need to understand what is the idea behind in these two opinions. Whether you can fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah just by purchasing a Sefer Torah without even looking over, according to the Rashi and the Muki Yosef. Then he did the mitzvah just by buying it. The only thing is, they say if you write it, there's actually an additional mitzvah. So that's the opinion that you could fulfill your obligation just by purchasing it. Other means or like the other opinion that you don't fulfill without Kedas Ramah, as the opinion of the Ramah, that if he purchases like it didn't Yotze, it's not Yotze. That's a Rambam b'Sefer Hayad. It also appears that this is the view of the Rambam b'Sefer Hayad as that if he just pushes his plane and he didn't look it over, says then he doesn't fulfill with that. So what's the difference between these two opinions? If you could just buy it to fulfill your obligation, or at least you must be Magia. In order to understand it, first we have to explain in Das Harosh v'Psakdim b'Shulchan Aruch, what on the opinion of the Rosh and the Shulchan Aruch, that we're saying that we write a Chumash and Mishnah and Gemara. How could they come and change a mitzvah es of the Torah? How could you come up with a new idea, as a mitzvah says, in a Torah is only that a positive mitzvah of the Torah should change from time to time. To saying that now in our time is the mitzvah nitvis mepurish b'Torah. To say now the mitzvah is not as explained in the Torah. The Torah it says kisvul chemes hashira hazrois. You have to write the Torah, and we're saying no, we changed it. The mitzvah changed, and now it means to write chumashim and Mishnah and Gemara. As the Rosh is mevayer, although the Rosh explains this, because the mitzvah the Rosh explains is to study in it. As the verse itself says, teach it to the Bnei Yisrael, put it in their mouth, place in their mouths. That seems, however, yes, that is the goal. That's the intent of the mitzvah, to study it, but the actual mitzvah, or mitzvah gufa, but the act of the mitzvah itself, but that is very clear in the Torah. Write for you this song, a mitzvah to shraib ma sefer Torah, that there's a mitzvah to write a sefer Torah. Hey, so we can say the explanation in this, that actually this Maisa mitzvah, the Gedra Maisa mitzvah, is explained by the qualification of the Torah, the Sima B'Fim, that the actually that is the mitzvah, is the learning, and not that kisful. To explain the idea of the Rosh and the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch, that you're yotzed the mitzvah, that the mitzvah today actually is or only with the writing Chumoshim, according to the Drisha. From them was gleich noch dem Kisvulachem Gomer. The fact that immediately after Kisvulachem is the Pasik Mamshich, the Pasik continues. As the Tachlis HaMitzvah is V'lamdos B'nai Yisrael Simo B'fiyem, that the goal of this mitzvah is to teach B'nai Yisrael, put in their mouth. Move on from them ganzen Hemshach HaParsha, it's also understood for the entire flow of the Parsha. As in Yonah Fuksiva Sefer Torah, now, what is the idea of writing the Sefer Torah? Is it should be placed in their mouth as the Torah bazol lo'ad, so that the Torah should be forever by the Yidden oichin dem zman. Also during the periods the pasuk continues there. When v'ni atzuni v'heferes berisi, they will make me angry and they will take away my covenant and. So in that time, they should still have the Torah. So therefore, Learn Torah is the Rosh. From this, the Rosh learns as the Inyan from Kisvulachem, that this idea, write it for yourself, is need that that's some Gedra mitzvah. That's not the essence of the definition of mitzvah, nor Bloi Zachiyuv Proti in their mitzvah. That is only a very detailed obligation within the mitzvah is the writing. It's not, the writing is not the mitzvah. That's a specific details of writing. Rebbe adds in the bracket, I can say an example for this. The Torah is talking by mitzvahs mezuzah. The Torah says by the mitzvah mezuzah, uchsavtom al mezuzah beisachu b'sharecha. You shall write them on the posts of your homes, and on your gates, on the doors, the gates of the city. Choch, the gedera mitzvah is nit ksivas hamezuzah. The definition of mitzvah is not writing the mezuzah, nor likvoya mezuzah, but to place the mezuzah. That's the mitzvah. And yet the Torah says ksiva, because that's a detail of how to get v'lamdo simo b'fiyam, how to teach them. So the Rebbe explains, the gedera mitzvah is ubehagdim. What is the definition of mitzvah? And the Rebbe introduces first. He says, not the mitzvah for limud Torah. There is a mitzvah to study Torah. It's not just a regular mitzvah, the Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Study of Torah is equal to all the mitzvahs. And in their mitzvah is the ikir wissen. What is the mitzvah of studying Torah? The main thing is to know kol ha'alochis psukas b'tameim, to know all the laws that have been ruled with the reasons. And das is chayiv hu min ha'Torah. This is something that one is obligated from the Torah and bizin and oifun. To the extent that they need to be sharp, clear, and very sharp in your mouth, meaning you know the Torah very well. Vishinantom should be very clear and very immediate. That you can answer to somebody immediately. They ask you the question. That's the extent that we have to learn Torah. Is doch shein lamdo sima b'fiyam from best neighbor. So l'chayda, then you have already the learning and in their mouth on the highest level, the highest way. What else do we need? So what is the Torah adding with the mitzvah in Parshas Vayelech? The Parshas Vayelech has special mitzvahs asay min ha-Torah. So different the portion of Vayelech, we get a special positive mitzvah of the Torah. As men zolton amaisa ketziva to bakumen a sefer Torah shebiksav, that you should do an act of writing so that you can get a scroll of Torah, a sefer of Torah in the written, learn in their Torah, to learn in this Torah. Hatam, and perhaps the reason is why we want you to learn dafke from writing. Durch them is the limud leichter, because through looking inside and writing, the study is easier, different, deeper. Oisius machkimis, oisius have the power to make smart, zicher von atos, and that way you're sure it's not a mistake. Quoting that one who learns from a sefer is not quickly going to forget. So there's a lot of benefits. And then you can review it at any time. You have the sefer. Was das alles beworren ki de boy dem behefer gomer. That properly protects us and cautions us from behefer, that it shouldn't be that they'll when yatsuni behefer as brise, they'll remove the brise, so we have it written down. Bisman amiris hatzivui, and in the time when the tzivui was said, is the maisik tzivui given farbundu. So this act of writing was connected, was tied to Afshori, impossible, nor dur limudin hasefer Torah. That was only possible through the study in hasefer Torah, because that's what they written over there. That's the only thing to write. There was no commentary. There was no Torah shebiksab. That was only the only one. It's not because the Torah objects to the Torah Shebal Peh. There was no Torah Shebal Peh. Vorum Aryeh hu deravi alei. There's a concept that it's a lion that is not that is kneeling over it and not allowing you. Meaning, it's not because we are objecting or we're not including Torah Shebal Peh, but there's a lion over there not allowing it. Meaning, there is no Torah Shebal Peh at that time. Oifun Gabra, on the person, he cannot learn the Torah Shebal Peh. Torah Shebal Peh hat man dann nicht getort verschreiben. The Torah that is written would not be allowed to be written. It wasn't allowed to be written at the time. So that's prevented by the Torah not to write it down. That's the Aryeh the Revi. The things that are orally, you're not allowed to write them down. Durch dem Aryeh, the Revi, kommt zu azaitige Zach, because we have this line that is leading, because we can't write down the Baal Peh, we have something in the way of fulfilling the mitzvah through the oral Torah, because we're not allowed to write it down. So there's a side point, nit mitzadem inyan didan. This is not because for our purposes, yes, Lamdas Yisroel Torah Shebal Peh too, but there's a side thing outside of our subject matter from Velamdo Sima Befira. Nor mitzadi dinim be'azoi verta sefer Torah. Oh, but how we have different halachas. Our sefer is made a sefer Torah as darf sein sirtut. It needs to be the lines scratched out in the lishma. It has to be for the sake of the Torah. Biksav Ashuri needs to be the Ashuri writing. B'lshen HaKodesh and Loshen Kodesh. Therefore, the Negel Poil. So in actuality, muz der Chisvu Lochem Zayin Aksiva mit Protedinim. That's why the writing needs to be with the details of these halachas. Over ho'idno, but nowadays, the mitzad is lasis lashem efir terisecha. That because it's time to do for Hashem, because the Torah has been heifer, taken away. People are not learning. So the Chachamim allowed to write down the Torah Shebal Peh. Hat man verschrieben euch Torah Shebal Peh, so also the Torah Shebal Peh was written. Und der Limud b'chdei leida pirush hamitzvos v'adinim al buryo. And in order to achieve, to know the mitzvahs, the interpretation of the mitzvahs and the laws clearly, is not from a Sefer Torah. It's not from a Sefer Torah, nor from the Farshidana Chumoshim, but it's from the various Chumshei Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, Pirushayim, from those that were written, the Chumoshei Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, and their commentaries, is the mitzvah from Kisvu. So then the mitzvah of writing, the Maisa, Parbundum midis for him, then it's connected to this for him. There's no din of sirtut because that's not a Sefer Torah. The prote dinim b'zayin doin a Sefer Torah. Those specific halachas that apply to Sefer Torah don't apply to regular svarim, the books that we learn in. Is b'hasem lozeh b'im kima mitzvahs durch zei. So fitting with this. So when we fulfill the mitzvahs through them, through the svarim, darf zayin o maspik, so therefore needs to be, and it's sufficient, a maisa v'chamachzei far svorim, act which makes them for the svarim. Durch welchenes ken zayin v'limdo simo b'fiyim v'teich haksav, through which it should be able to learn and put in their mouth from writing. So over there, it's not negaya the process and how and what those laws aren't connected to the writing of Chumoshim and Mishnah Gemara. So therefore, main thing is they have to be in the Ksab. This is similar to this. It's similar that we have dun mino v'ukiba asra. We have the rule that you can learn from it, but you put it in its place and put it in asun. It's in this place. In other words, we're in the time of the Gemara. Over there was a Sefer Torah. Here, it's the same thing by Svarim. So we learn from there that it has to be written down, but it goes according to the laws of Svarim, which don't need sirtu, don't need anything, and that's the way to become the mitzvah. Vov. Amein v'dugma l'dover. Similar, some example for this idea. The chiyuv simcha b'yontif, the obligation to rejoice on yontif. But this man abayis is those given durch Shalmei Simcha. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the Simcha was accomplished through using the Kabbanis, the Shlom of Simcha. Is the Kamo Deyas Chal midaraisa ich bisman hazeh durch achilas basar. So many opinions from the Torah today. It also applies by eating meat. We don't have the korban, but we have the mitzvah to eat basar. Was ain't simcha lebasar that says the simcha is only basar, that you have to have basar in our Torah to get the simcha, even bisman hazeh when we don't have the shalmei simcha. As it move on bepashtus, however, is very simply understood as the simcha bebasar bisman hazeh, the joy that we have with meat nowadays. Hotni di gedorim does not have the boundaries. Was eine do in shalmei simcha. We don't have the same boundaries as it was when we ate the shalmei simcha. They're eaten while you have to be pure. They're eaten in Yerushalayim. But those those are all matters, and they are boundaries. They're qualifications. That's the korban part of the Shalmei Simcha, the Shlomim of korbanos of Simcha. They needed those particular guidelines and specifics. But it's not because of the simcha that's in it. But it's just the simcha part, which, according to that opinion that we eat today, meat minatoida for simcha, the key mitzvah simchas yomtiv, fulfilling the mitzvah simchas yomtiv. Valderech ze binyonenu u'bilshoin hashas. Same thing in our matter, using the language of the Gemara. Loi min Hashem huzeh. This is not the same name. It's not the same idea. The alle prote dinim was einen doing siva sefer Torah. All of the specific laws that exist in writing sefer Torah, seine mitzad der chefza from sefer Torah. They are because of the object, because of the sefer Torah. Nit mitzad dem chiv of mitzvah, that it's not because of the obligation of the mitzvah on kisva lachemes hashira azois to write the shira. This shira, writing the shira is anything. The reason why we have all the limitations on all the qualifications, all the specific laws, is because we're writing a sefer Torah. But as soon as we transfer that mitzvah to writing the pirushim, Chumash Gemara, then we don't have all these limitations. In order to be able to be learning and put in, we don't have any limitation. So therefore it's understood as that also, according to the view of the Rosh, is in the mitzvah. According to the Rosh, it did not change. The definition of this mitzvah never changed. The mitzvah was never writing a Sefer Torah. The mitzvah was Lamda B'Fiyam, which expressed itself. How do we get it B'Ksav? Because the only thing was available was Sefer Torah. But now it expresses itself. The mitzvah is to provide for the Svarim. As bleibt noch aber the Shaila. However, the question remains, we don't see that we should fulfill the mitzvah even to write. Don't even write the Chumoshim. Nor does to their matris, the printer does it, even if you order it by the printer, and you make it for an agent, it's a mitzvah more than the shliach. So why don't we do it by yourself? That's answered according to the explanation as Sefer Torah that we don't write it because the printer does a better job. The printer does a better printing, and as the Rebbe explained over there, we don't have the mitzvah if the shliach can do a better job. So let the printer do it. But the Rebbe says, and there's additional, as the Rebbe will explain, the common sif test that when we talk about printing, there is no inyan of you, since it's about chumoshim, there's no inyan to have to dafke write it. Zay. So based on the above, that when we have two matters, we have writing a Sefer Torah, writing Svarim. Some laws apply to the Sefer Torah, Sirtut Lishma. Those laws don't apply to regular Svarim. So as b'shayches von zwei Yonim can sein protim. So there's some details welche sein and dun mino umino that we learn from it, and from it applies to the other place, to the other inyan. Umino, and from it you also have to do. Uprotim, and other details welche uki ba'asro that we put in its place that we don't apply. We can explain many ideas. The Rebbe is going to give now various different areas to give you the idea that we find that in some things they're the same, and then in other things it's different. Say, for example, davening, which were instituted in the place of the korbanos, and although they take the place of korbanos, there is no effort even to begin with. We never found people as in the tzibur akoyin that there should be in the minyan, there should be a koyin. So because a koyin was supposed to be makriv the korbanos, and you're doing tefillah, why is there no koyin there? V'atam the matzinu korban beloy koyin, and the reason is because there is a korban without a koyin. So you don't, a koyin is not an essential part. Then koyin b'bama, there's no koyin by a bama. When there's not on the mizbech, we don't need a koyin. So, and one detail, we don't need a koyin. But masha'enkin b'negel hazman, but then you think, when do you daven? Darfon the tefillah zayin bizman hakrovas at midim. The time needs to be when you bring the tmidim. You can hold korban shebizman, because any time a korban, which is timely, over zman batal korban. If the time passes, there's no more korban over there. So we find in some things that from the korban we apply, and something we don't. Then another example would be in Seder Leil Pesach, in the order of Pesach night. The minhag within the Seder is the custom in our countries, amiz nizar nitzu essen basar tzli Leil Pesach, that you're careful not to eat roasted meat on the night of Pesach. Why? That you might say that this is a korban Pesach, because Pesach had to be eaten roasted. So we don't eat, the minhag is not to eat tzli. Yet you take a zeroya, which is roasted, as a zecher lePesach shehoyu tzli, to remember the Pesach that was roasted by fire. So we do take a roasted piece on the Seder. By lachila bePesach is iker geder haPesach shalebo mitchilosei elo lachila. Oistes. Und das ist die Hasbore von the zwei Deis Hanal, and this is the explanation in the two opinions that we mentioned earlier, Benigeya Iyum Mitzvahs Kisu Lachem, as it relates to fulfilling the mitzvah that you should write the Sefer Torah, when mi is das Mekayim mit a Sefer Torah, when the mitzvah is to fulfill it with the actual scroll, a Sefer Torah. So at that time, that's not Ho'idna, but at that time, how much of the requirement of the Sefer Torah stretches to the part of the mitzvah? Shitas HaRambam v'Ramo is the view of the Rambam Ramo is Vibal, the mitzvah is verbunden. Mit der Kedusha von Gesiva Sefer Torah, since this mitzvah is tied with the sanctity of writing a Sefer Torah, und die Kedusha is Mechayev de Tanai HaMaisa, and the Kedusha of the Sefer Torah obligates us for the conditions, the way it should be done, with all the proper ways a Sefer Torah is written, which is Ksivas Sefer Torah. Writing, the condition of the act is writing the Sefer Torah. Vert od di Maisa, so then that act becomes nit nor a prat in der Hefze. It's not only a detail in the object, in Kedusha Sefer Torah, in the sanctity of the Sefer Torah. It's not just a requirement because it's a Sefer Torah, nor Chelek, but this becomes a portion from the Kiyum mitzvah from Kisu Lachem. That's how we fulfill the mitzvah of right for you. Underiber, and therefore, when there is Mekayim, the mitzvah will tell us a love, Mishraim Sefer Torah, when he fulfills the mitzvah that lies upon him with the writing of a Sefer Torah, Darv Zayin the Maisa mitzvah, then the act of the mitzvah needs to be durch Ksiva Sefer Torah. Either you actually write the Sefer Torah, or der Magia Zayin Sefer Torah Shoyu Muta, or to at least check over a Sefer Torah that had mistakes. Because durch Zayin Pa'ula vert Nigmar v'nishlam der Kisu Lachem, through his act, you conclude and you complete the writing Kisu Lachem. But if he just buys it without checking it over, is there nit yaitza? You don't fulfill the obligation. As opposed to the opinion of Rashi and Mukhi Yosef, is the kedusha sa Sefer Torah nit a chelek von der mitzvah von Kisu Lachem. The sanctity of a Sefer Torah is not a part of the mitzvah that you should write for you. Dit noyim seinen nor of poilun kedusha Sefer Torah. These conditions that we need for a Sefer Torah are only to impact and make the Sefer Torah holy, or the holiness of the Sefer Torah. But it doesn't extend to becoming the mitzvah of Ksiva Sefer Torah. B'meila is if the kedusha is shenda, if the kedusha already consists, is there already, because he buys the Sefer Torah, is oich b'Sefer Torah maspik when konei. So therefore, even when you're fulfilling the mitzvah of Kis Lachem through a Sefer Torah, it's sufficient when you purchased it. Lachem and ashuk, when you buy it from the market. So lifizeh, according to this, is muvan ados was. Understand now that ha'idna mitzvah lichtev chumshe ha'Torah Mishnah Gemara Pirushem. That now the mitzvah is to write Chumashim of the Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, and the commentaries. Meintas nit afilu oichle das Ramah. This does not mean, even according to the Ramah, as dos muzayin ba'oifum ksivose. It doesn't mean that it needs to be that he should either write it, or the b'shlechuseid, or he should send an agent, or the duch magia zayin dem sefer, or to look over the check over the sefer. But od these svorim mitzad inyono, because these svorim, from their matters, the way they're fodr nit, they do not need as bazei zol zayin davke ma'ase odom. They don't need that there should be the act of the human over there. As Ken Zain Maise Koif, it could be the act of a monkey, which is the Mechoina, which is a machine. Abizi is Ksuba, the main thing that it's written. Is Do B'Shleimusa, so then, once it's written, then they exist and fully V'lamdo Simo B'Fiyam to teach them in their mouth. The Loshin HaRosh VaShulchan Aruch, the fact that the Rosh and the Shulchan Aruch use the language Koisrim to write, Dichomoshim, while their Mokir Hadin V'Yisoyde is Koisrim Sefer Torah, because the source and the Halacha and the basis is from writing the Sefer Torah, so they use the Loshin of Koisrim. We learn from the Sefer Torah, but we apply it in its place. And since we're dealing about Svarim over here and printed, so we don't need the conditions of the Sefer Torah, and just purchasing is sufficient. Yud. According to this, we have explanation and understanding. How we fulfill the mitzvahs, and now write this shira, how we fulfill it in nowadays. Yeshleimer Dugma, to say an example, just like in the mitzvah of studying Torah, is the Chaim Niter Seder. So today, the order is not as menzal uplan and kol ha-Torah. You should study the entire Torah, ha-halachas, all the laws, kula. Und dann noch erst la'ayin u'lepalvukol, and only afterwards to look into and to have this pilpul, the insights. We start right away. Al derech zeh is benegayet zum kiyum mitzvahs kisu lachem esashir azos. Similar is as it relates to fulfillment of the mitzvah of write this shira. Ha'idna nowadays, as das meint nicht as is mechuyev zu schreiben allein. It does not mean that he's obligated to write it on his own, or the koifen, or even to buy it. On alle svarim, and it means he needs to buy all the books, Chamisha Chumshe HaTorah, the 5 Chumshe of Torah, V'Gemara, Perusheim, and all the commentaries. That's not what the obligation is. Unas nor dan is memekayim the mitzvah. Only if you do it completely, that's when you fulfill the mitzvah. Bos Perusheim is that the commentaries, it's a tremendous amount. And look at the actual, which is the proof is from the facts. We see that the Svarim that most Yidden and almost all Yidden they don't include all the categories, all the commentaries, because we don't really have to today. The main thing is that it should be lamda b'fiyam, that you should be able to learn and to be able to fulfill. That's the way to fulfill the mitzvah of Ata Kisu Lachem. Yudalef. Oishidal. Apizei is moving. According to this is understood. Was the Gemara Zog, the Gemara says, Kisvu, Kosvei Malo Olava Kosv Kilu Kibla Mahar Sinai. That if he writes it, the Torah counts it as if he received it from Mount Sinai. And the Rambam brings this up in Sefer Halacha Shloi. The Rambam actually also brings this down in the Sefer, which is Halacha laws. Warum das is der Geder von Mitzvah Ba'ata Kisu Lachem? Because this is actually the definition of the mitzvahs of writing it. An inyan un me'ein Kabbalah Satorah. This is an idea and something of receiving the Torah. Was kum durch sein Asiyah. Through your action, you're basically receiving the Torah. Durch sein Schreiben und zugreifen the Sefer Torah, through his writing and preparing the Sefer Torah. Oder durch kaufen the Svarim an almem meine, or by purchasing the above mentioned Svarim from his money, und durch v'lamdo shel acharze, and through the studying that follows. That's the way your Kabbalah Satira. Says no, the only thing is, was bedeutet, so the first generation hat man the mitzvah mekayim given durch Ksiva Sefer Torah. They fulfilled this mitzvah by writing the Sefer Torah. When you write it with your hand, is by im de Kabbalah Satira and Ephraim von Shleimus. So then he received the Torah in a wholesome way. And that's what we say, Hare Huki, Ilu Kiblam Har Sinai, as if he received it from Mount Sinai. This is similar to receiving the Torah the first time. So that it brought the study and the keeping of the mitzvah fully by actually writing it and receiving it the first as it did in the first time. But similar from it, of it is also in all times and all places. When a Yid kauft svarim und lernt in say, when a Yid buys, purchases svarim and learns them, so he is like receiving it from Matan Torah. The kol anal is euch muban. So from all the above, it's also understood wie wichtig es is, how important it is. The Ishtadlus, the effort, as jeder Yid soll haben svarim in sein Haus, that every person, every Jew should have svarim, books in his house. Best would be to have a house full of svarim. But minimally, person must have in his possession the yisoid svarim, the basic svarim, which is sidurim, prayer books, chumoshim, chumosh Tanakh, mishnayos, sifrei piskei dinim, the laws that rule halachas, und es v'chulu, etc., und es soll sein der velamdo in ze, and needs to learn in them, sima b'fiyem, place it in their mouth. Inyan le'inyan, ba'isa inyan, and from one idea to the next idea, but it's still within the same idea, yesh lahoisi b'derech efshe, we can add, possibly, the mitzvah from Ksiva Sefer Torah, the mitzvah of writing Sefer Torah was melerim top from posik v'ata kisel l'chemes hashira, that we learn from the verse, now write this of the song, is kenal kol Sefer Torah kula. That means the entire Sefer Torah. Yesh leimer bazeh hoisofa al pshat haloshen. And we can say, to add on the meaning of the language, v'bal das lekam midi, since there is nothing which is not hinted in the Torah, is in their Sefer Torah. So in the Sefer Torah that you actually write, in Torah Shebiksav, in the written Torah, it's hinted and it includes also the entire oral Torah. Was nitna leMoshe Sinai, was given to Moshe from Sinai, which is Mishnah, Talmud, V'Agoda, V'Chulu, everything. Biz kol, the Mishnah, the learning, the Agoda, biz kol Masha Talmud, V'Asik Osid L'Chadish, V'Chulu. So that means that everything, really, when you receive the Torah, when you write the Torah, everything is included. And the same thing happens when the person writes the Sefer Torah, this mitzvah, he's like receiving it from Sinai. Zog doch the Gemara says that there was shreibt Sefer Torah. One who writes it is my law of Akosu, Kilu Kiblu Har Sinai, as if he received it from Har Sinai, and that would include everything. Unchoch as bepashtus kemen learnen, as their my law. So what is the simple meaning? We counted for him my law. Meitaschar, it means the reward as if he got it from Har Sinai. Der schar, dem schar as benutztes als Saraya, the reward that we use this as a proof as erhot that he has on his own. That's his reward for writing the Sefer Torah, that on his own you get the advantage of receiving the Torah with the Namuki Yosef Zokt. Sheyesh lemidas rachamim loymar. He says that the measure of compassion has to say, just as he troubled this trouble, so he would also trouble himself to go in the desert in order to receive the Torah from Har Sinai by going and riding and going through this trouble. It is not a reward which is a result of the mitzvah Sefer Torah. This is the Maila that it's evidence from the fact that he went and wrote this Sefer Torah is Mala Olavakosiv Kila Kiblim Har Sinai. The Rambam over welcher bringt das Arop La Loch in sein Sefer Hayad. The Rambam, however, who brings this down as a halacha in the Sefer Hayad, was besteht von halachas which consists of laws. Ubefrat as that it is reingestellt mitten in der ersten halacha, especially that he placed in the middle of the first halacha was retzach wegen der mitzvah lepoil, that he talks about the mitzvah in actuality. Und is noch dabei mishane von Loshna Gemorre und sagt, and he changes the Loshna Gemorre and he says, V'im koser biyodei harehi ki ilu kibla mahar Sinai, that if he wrote it in his hand, it's as if he received it from Har Sinai. Is mashma as that inyan is aschar umesuba from their mitzvahs ksiva sefer Torah. So over there, it's mashma that this idea of Kibla Har Sinai is not a show for his devotion, but rather a reward that for Ksiva Sefer Torah is as if he received it. V'yesh loymar, and we can say al derech hamulamed as ben chavei Torah, my lol of akosiv kila yolde. If you teach a son of your friend Torah, then you're considered like you gave birth to him. So in this case, this is considered as if you get it from Har Sinai because you taught Torah or you wrote Torah in this case. That's as if you received it from Har Sinai. So the Rebbe brings in this ois, the Rebbe said 2 points. First, the Rebbe made the point that added that we're talking about Kisvu Lachem Asashira, we're talking about Torah Shebiksav, it includes also the Torah Shabal Peh. And the same thing goes to the person who is Ki'iluk, that it also includes Torah Shabal Peh. And the second point he makes that although that when we learn it, Maila Olov, that means that this is sort of a proof that the person would get and trouble himself, but really this is actually a schar in the Lashon of the Rambam. Gimel v'yirotzen, with the will as b'korev mamish, that very soon, so zayin v'sachazeno einenu, our eyes shall see the bias melech HaMashiach mamash, with the actual coming of the King Mashiach. And we'll write the second Torah for the sake and the purpose of the king. That Sefer should be, as the Pasuk says, with him constantly. As the Pasuk says, it should be with him and he will read in it all the days of his life. And Hashem's kingdom will be revealed. Hashem will be a king over all the land. In that day will be Hashem Echad. Hashem will be one. His name will be one. Mesichas Achris Shel Pesach, Achron Shel Pesach. The Shabbos Barshes Kedoshim Tovshin Amal.